My baby likes switching from this to that. If I don't mind it, why do you care? It's just love, only love. Shine down, raining down, down. It's just love, only love. A scratch, a kiss, my baby, my bliss.
We are beginning to understand that the world is always being made fresh and never finished. Grace Lee Boggs said that. We have arrived to a moment where we must shake up the society we live in. Isabel Allende said that. You always fight for people's dignity. My mother said that. These years have shown us how far we have to go. These years have shown us how far we can go, how we live, how we work, how we question, how we rest, how we listen, how we make family and community. Everywhere, women are building and rebuilding with curiosity and intent and urgency. Maybe every human alive has at some point believed that they're living at a unique moment in history. But maybe every moment is unique. And maybe what makes it unique is that it is ours. Ours to hold, ours to grow, ours to own. So the question is, what will we do together in this moment?
Hey, everybody. I am Raquel Willis. I'm a writer, an activist, and low-key a plant connoisseur. I love my Echeveria. Look it up. I am also one of the founding members of the Meteor. And this epic night of change-making and code-breaking is brought to you with our partners at Chime for Change, a campaign founded in 2013 by Gucci to amplify voices speaking out about gender equality. Okay, Gucci, love your clothes and of course, love gender equality. I'm so excited to be your host tonight. Welcome to 21 for 21. Now, tonight's program is in English, but you can use the closed caption button to select other languages. And in addition to the comments area, there's a share and connect button for interacting on the platform. Of course, we would love to be meeting in person, and we will be ASAP. But being online, we get to bring international speakers to an international audience at home enjoying international snacks or cocktails or mocktails, because this is also a watch party. I am live from Brooklyn. And I am so glad we have this moment to share because it has been a year plus plus. I know you feel it. There has been so much trauma. COVID-19 turned the world upside down and made many of us feel the vulnerability and pain of the human condition. But also, inside this year, people have achieved great things, from women organizing protests against violence like Ni Una Menos in Argentina, to Stacey Abrams in my home state of Georgia, generating an all-time record voter turnout of over 4 million, to organizers of other powerful protests like the Black Trans Lives Matter March. Okay, that's me. That's right. 20,000 of you came out that day, and it was so beautiful. I'll never forget it. Now, before we go on, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge the state violence occurring in Gaza and our sincerest hope that in our lifetimes, we can see a free Palestine and safety for all Palestinians and Israelis. Now, tonight's guests are demonstrating to us that with bravery and community, systems can change and perspectives can shift. We are living in a moment for feminists' imagination, a moment to entertain dreams that people might have told us years ago were too big or too ambitious or just simply impossible. The portal is now open. All we have to do is walk through it with purpose. And with that in mind, our first speaker is a woman whose activism has deep personal roots. Her father was imprisoned for his political dissidence, and her mother was assassinated for hers. But she has risen from the ashes of that injustice to become a powerful advocate for freedom. Please welcome the president of the Women in Africa Initiative, Hafsat Abiola.
Morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are on our planet. My name is Hafsat Abiola, and it's my distinct honor and pleasure to welcome all of you to this incredibly important conversation that women need to have if we're going to make the world what we deserve it to be. COVID showed us the power women have and the incredible contribution women make to make the world work. Most 70% of frontline workers are women, and they've put their lives on the line to save lives. Then we've also seen that in the few countries that have been bold enough to choose women leaders, the women have outperformed men in terms of the ability to make sure they protect as many lives as possible. The way that the world looks at men is when men have potential to perform in a certain role. They may not have all the boxes ticked, but if they show potential that they could have all the skills, they could gain those skills in the role, then the world gives them the opportunity to try. And I think women have to demand of the world that same approach, and start, instead of thinking we need to be perfect to take a role, we should start thinking that we can become perfect while in the role. I remember, my father, when he was put in jail, just to speak up was a big deal. My mother was leading a movement in Nigeria, and she was being threatened. So I had to stand up. At this point, I knew that everything required to deliver for Nigeria, I did not have. But I knew that, well, even if you don't have it, there's no time to get it because time is going. And my father was 56 when he was put in jail. I just didn't think he had the time that Nelson Mandela, who was in his 30s when he was put in jail, had. If we couldn't wait 30-some years of prison term for him to come out, he would be dead by then. So I had to stand up and I had to find my voice. I had to go begin organizing skills I never had. I had to learn, but I learned it on the journey. And women have that possibility. So I want to say to women all over the world, stand up, take the leadership position and grow into it. You will be everything you need to be, you will be in the course of serving in that position, not before you serve. And if you wait until you have enough to serve, it's possible that there won't be a world to serve by then.
In Japan, where I'm from, we are currently ranked 121st on the Global Gender Gap Index. Japan is perceived to be this modern country with talking toilets and advanced technology, but traditional gender roles still prevail. Sameness is celebrated and diversity is assimilated. Moreover, binary ways of thinking about gender limit women, girls, trans, and gender nonconforming people from living their everyday lives without facing prejudice or discrimination. We're taught to conform, we're taught to be silent, and we're taught to change ourselves to fit into this society. I want a future where I don't need to change myself to fit into this society. It's society that needs to change, and people are already fighting every day to change this. This society needs to recognize our power and listen to our voices. Then and only then will we have a future that celebrates difference rather than homogenizes it.
I hope y'all are buckled in because we are turning now to a conversation about the caregiving crisis. And during the pandemic, moms got beyond burden this past year. Almost 3 million women have left the labor force in the past year, mostly women of color, and a quarter of those tied directly to a lack of childcare. Reshma Saujani is the founder of the groundbreaking Girls Who Code and the driving force behind the Marshall Plan for Moms, which is asking Congress and the White House to pay mothers for their unseen and unpaid labor. She is speaking with Dr. Sylvia Federici, a feminist heavyweight who co-founded the International Wages for Housework movement of the 1970s. Now, if you have had some experience related to the caregiving crisis, please put it in the comments while we listen in on this important discussion.
Dr. Federici, I am so honored to be here with you today. I'm a huge fan of your work. I think I call myself a fangirl of everything that you're doing. So I've spent the past year working on a campaign called the Marshall Plan for Moms, because this past year moms just got crushed and our entire system of care in this country was shown to be broken. You predicted this.
Yeah, I predicted it because the COVID pandemic has exacerbated the crisis that was there to begin with. I mean, women have always been in crisis because, all the work of reproduction, which is immense. I think few people who are not doing this work understand how many tasks are included in what we call domestic work.
Yeah. You been doing this work for a very long time. And in the 1970s, you were one of the leaders of the Wages for Housework campaign here in the United States. What was the history of the Wages for Housework campaign? What were you fighting for?
Yeah.
What happened?
Yeah. Well, what happened first was, there was a big debate in the feminist movement about the roots of women's oppression. And there was a big agreement that, some of the problems had to do with housework. The fact that women had been expected to do all the domestic work, children, procreation, etc. It was one of the causes for the particular form of discrimination that women have suffered in the history of this society, the history of capitalist society. One section of the feminist movement basically, argued that this is because this work is not as important as wage labor, is not really productive, and so we don't have the power. And so the ultimate strategy for liberation was go out to get a job,
right,
join the union. And of course, many women were doing that and struggling to do that. But we began to analyze what is this work, and realized that this work is extremely productive. In fact, it's the work that sustains every other activity. You couldn't have any economic activity if you don't have, all this work that is really producing workers.
Yeah.
We began to work out the idea that in the capitalist organization of work, you have two types of factories.
One in the home
one
and
kind
one in
of
the work,
factory
right?
is that makes cars, and the other is the workers who make the cars.
Yeah.
And this is even more important, And so this is where the idea of how do you make it visible? How do you show? And the question of the wage.
You say that the negotiation shouldn't be with the man, it should be with the whole system.
Absolutely. It's very important because I think that for many women, the solution to housework, share the work.
Right.
Share the work, of course, great, share the work. However, first of all, there's a serious problem to share the work, because in order to share the work, you also have to really transform the organization of the wage workplace. Because so many women that we talk to, when a child was born, she would stay home because he would earn higher wages. But also more and more, there's a lot of women who live alone, who have children who are alone. And so we couldn't see the sharing the work as a general strategy, right? And we always stressed that it's wages for housework, not for women, not for housewives, which means that whoever does the work, that it's not based on biology.
Why was it such a radical idea? Because I assume here's your group talking about this. Here are the, I guess, traditional feminists that are saying, let's focus all of our energy on equality in the workplace.
Yeah.
They think you're all a bunch of radical.
Yeah, absolutely radical. And some would think actually we were conservative, and some would think that we were too radical. I think it was radical because this work had never really been seen as work. And also because there was a kind of taboo, even among many feminists, to think of this work in terms of wages and work and demanding payment, because the idea of, motherhood, the family, for many, we still heard many feminists telling, oh, this is the only place where there's no economic relation. It's like a safe haven.
As I've been advocating for the Marshall Plan for moms, the biggest criticism is motherhood is a choice.
Yeah.
You
It's
do
a
this out of love.
blackmail. It's a blackmail, So he's saying, yeah, we can love. You can love your job, the job that you do aside, and still, we don't see anybody refusing to be paid.
Yeah.
Teachers say that they have great satisfaction teaching students, educating their soul, their minds, opening up their minds, and yet they don't refuse a paycheck. It's only when it comes to women. There's something so sacred, they cannot be touched. Yeah. And the same women have to struggle and suffer and be dependent. It's a very hypocritical to say that because you care for your family, your children, that care somehow is going to be, undermined by the fact that you will have more resources. And in fact, to have the peace of mind, or not to have to worry continuously whether you're going to make it to the end of the month, whether you can pay the rent. This is now the reality for millions of women. Yeah. The COVID has brought it out in a very dramatic way. But I'd like to stress the situation that the COVID has created has exasperated and made visible something that was pre-existing. Even before the COVID, women's life expectancy has decreased. Women's life expectancy has been on a downward path. And
especially for women of color.
Yeah. And something that we really have to put on the agenda.
What's one thing that everybody can do that's watching?
One thing that everybody can do is beginning to connect with other women. I think it's very important that they can connect with other women and begin to discuss this question, begin to create networks so that you don't face the crisis. This facing the crisis alone, right? Whether it's crisis in the family or the crisis in relation to your economic situation, and beginning to discuss. So I think that this is extremely important.
Are you hopeful? You, again, have been doing this work forever. And this has been a pretty tremendous year in terms
Yeah.
of, I think, the attention that both your
Yeah.
work and the Wages for Housework movement has gotten. Do you think that things will change? Can
They
things
have
change?
to. You have to be hopeful. Of course, you have to. No, because pessimism doesn't lead to anything. And we have to do everything we can.
Thank you so much, Dr. Federici.
Very, very happy that we have this conversation.
Me too.
I mean, knowing how hard the pandemic hit Black and Brown women, I really felt that conversation. For the mothers and the sisters and caregivers who lost their places in the workforce. Now, I told you earlier we're live, so we have some amazing comments pouring in. I wanted to read a few. We have from Grace F. Non-parents also shared the burden to try to support our friends and coworkers who were overburdened by taking on more of what we could help and support. It impacted everyone, but to very different degrees. That's so true, Grace. We also have from Tara A. I think about caring for my parents and in-laws, whether they are near or far. Another kind of caregiving that women are taking responsibility for. Thank y'all for those comments, and please keep them coming in all night because we're all in this conversation together. Now, I know this pandemic, everything that we have talked about so far, it was a lot, and we have to do better by our sisters and our siblings. Now, continuing with the theme of what we learned about the future coming out of this last year, you might have seen some action on Twitter from the disability community. And we have one of those tweets as well. I cannot tell you how infuriating it is to have rubbed into your face that 30 years after ADA, disabled people don't have accessible education, but we can implement it for abled people. So, you know what? In thinking about that comment, this would be a great time to check in with a disability activist and Academy Award nominated producer of this year's Crip Camp. Please welcome Andrea Levant.
COVID has proven what disabled people have known all along. Allowing people to work in a space that suits their individual needs does not mean diminished productivity. Actually, for many, it's proven just the opposite. As a disabled Black woman, I'm constantly thinking about what a truly inclusive society looks like. Ultimately, it means people are able to be their fullest, most authentic selves without fear of negative consequences or repercussions. It means having confidence that our opinions will be valued, that our ideas will be implemented, and that our needs will be met. In many ways, the transitions and adjustments required amidst the pandemic have created a more level playing field for the 1 in 4 of us Americans that identify as disabled. My feminist future is inclusive of every aspect of my identity. It means that I can be a woman, Black, disabled in any space that I enter, knowing that my opinions, that my experiences will be valued, that I will be considered worthy, and that I will be embraced for exactly who I am.
I want you to remember your strength and your power. I'm Cherokee. I'm from a matrilineal society where women have always had power and our women have always been sacred. In the 1700s, when our chief Atakashla met with the British delegates, he was told to bring his council, those who exceeded in wisdom, war, and deed. And so he did. He showed up with his beloved men and women. Now, when Chief Atakashla noticed the absence of British women, he asked, "Where are your women?" To which the British replied, "Oh, we do not involve them in matters of state." Chief Atakashla turned to my people and said, "We cannot trust them. We're only thinking with half our brains. And I want a future where we think with 100% of our brains, not just half." There's a Cheyenne proverb that I love that says, "A nation is not conquered until the hearts of its women are on the ground, no matter how brave its warriors or how strong its weapons." As a woman, I can safely say our hearts are not on the ground, and it will be a long time before they ever will be. Remember that. Ado, thank you.
Hello to everybody watching, committed to making better feminist futures. I am Joy Blumwini, a poet of code, telling stories that make daughters of diasporas dream and sons of privilege pause. I am also the founder of the Algorithmic Justice League, where we're building a world with more equitable, accountable, and just artificial intelligence. We're on a mission to fight something I call the coded gaze. Like the male gaze and the white gaze or the post-colonial gaze, the coded gaze is a reflection of those who have the power and privilege to shape the technologies that shape our societies. I encountered the coded gaze while working on a class project at MIT that used face detection. To get the project to work, I put on a white mask over my dark skin to be detected by a machine. This experience of coding in white face led me to ask, are machines really neutral? And what we continue to see is not so much. As algorithmic systems are infiltrating our lives, determining if your grandmother has access to health care, the grades our children receive, and even if you're judged worthy of a job, headlines remind us that many forms of discrimination, like racism, sexism, ableism, and more, are being mechanized. Think of an ism, and it's likely being embedded into AI. No one is immune, yet those most marginalized, the ex-coded, are being impacted by algorithms that propagate systemic oppression the most. We see this with the wrongful arrest of Robert Williams in front of his 2 young daughters linked to facial recognition misidentification. We see this with the botched Amazon hiring model that routinely deprioritized resumes from women. We see this with trans drivers being locked out of economic opportunity when Uber algorithmic identification verification fails. Given all of this, to fight for the ex-coded, the Algorithmic Justice League uses a blend of art and research to illuminate and fight algorithmic harms. Through poetry, we ask, can machines ever see my queens as I view them? Can machines ever see our grandmothers as we knew them? Ida B. Wells, data science pioneer, hanging facts, stacking stats on the lynching of humanity, teaching truths hidden in data, each entry and omission, a person worthy of respect. Shirley Chisholm, unbought and unbossed, the first Black Congresswoman, but not the first to be misidentified by machines well-versed in data-driven mistakes. Michelle Obama, unabashed and unafraid to wear her crown of history. Yet her crown seems a mystery to systems unsure of her hair. A wig, a bouffant, a toupee, maybe not. Are there no words for our braids and our locks? The sunny skin and relaxed hair make Oprah the first lady? Even for her face well-known, some algorithms fault her, echoing sentiments that strong women are men. We laugh, celebrating the successes of our sisters with Serena smiles. No label is worthy of our beauty. And in addition to the poetry, through our research, we apply intersectional analysis. We assess the matrix of domination as we see algorithmic discrimination reloaded. And we have shown racial and gender bias in AI from some of the largest tech companies in the world. Feminist Futures for AI must underscore that if you have a face, you have a place in the conversation about technologies that govern our lives. Through our advocacy, we work with communities on the front line, like the Brooklyn tenants who successfully defeated the installation of an unwanted face surveillance system. In the documentary Coded Bias on Netflix, their fight, along with the work of the Algorithmic Justice League and many others, is featured. And I want to close with a few lines from a poem I wrote to honor the tenants led by courageous women and people of color who stood up to power and won. To the Brooklyn tenants and freedom fighters around the world, resisting and revealing the lie that we must accept the surrender of our faces, the harvesting of our data, the plunder of our traces, we celebrate your courage. No silence, no consent. You show the path to algorithmic justice requires a league, a sisterhood, a neighborhood, 21 for 21 visions for feminist futures, your visions. Petitions and potlucks, platforms like the Meteor, everyone chiming in to orchestrate change. The fight for algorithmic justice is the fight for gender equality. You cannot have gender equality in the age of AI without algorithmic justice. We cannot have racial justice without algorithmic justice. We cannot have disability justice without algorithmic justice. We choose feminist futures where data is not destiny, where your hue is not a cue for machines to dismiss your humanity, where the legacies and hopes of the freedom fighters past and present birth the place where the dreams of daughters of diasporas come through and come true.
Hi everyone, my name is Rumayt Al-Basaidi and I hail from Oman. I am a marine scientist and a big advocate for women's empowerment. I'm passionate about climate change, but using gender as a lens to focus on climate justice. Now, when we hear climate change, the first images that come to mind are those of melting glaciers, the scorching heat in the summers, and the flooding of coastal areas. Often lost in the imagery is the role the world's oceans play in countering the worst effects of global warming. And although oceans and seas cover more than 2/3 of the Earth's surface, they're taken for granted most of the time. People and governments tend to forget that they are rich in resources, and I tend to say this a lot as a marine scientist. The seas provide us with food, energy, and minerals. And even though it's cliche to say this, but it's true, since the high seas belong to no nation, they are the most exploited by everyone. The paradigm that we actually see when we discuss land versus ocean conservation, the oceans being forgotten, is pretty much the same one that when we actually talk about gender. And quite often the narrative is that men and women are likely to be affected by climate change the same way. But the fact of the matter, that's not true. It's not true. The impact of climate change on gender is not the same. Why, Rumaytha, is that the case? Well, mainly it's because women represent the majority of the world's poor. And that's something that I think a lot of people tend to forget, that women are proportionately more dependent on threatened natural resources than men. Well, Mary Robinson, Ireland's first female president and fellow activist, expressed it best. Climate change is a man-made problem with a feminist solution. I wouldn't be where I am today, so passionate about the environment, if it wasn't for my mom teaching me basic stuff about how you need to conserve energy and not waste water. And we've seen it also in the pandemic as well, right? Women's participation at a political level, look at New Zealand, look at Estonia, and so many other countries, Taiwan. They've resulted in greater responsiveness to citizens' needs, and it often increases cooperation across party and ethnic lines and delivering more sustainable peace, which we so much need. Now, feminism and environmentalism go hand in hand. Together, they provide a way out of the current global crisis. And in such historic moments that we currently live in, from Black Lives Matter that pushed conversations on discrimination and racial justice further into light, it wasn't only in the US, by the way, it reached here in my own home country of Oman. And when we look at the pandemic, that is actually widening the gap when it comes to gender as we speak. Adopting an eco-feminist perspective allows for more better coordination, I think, between both fights of women's rights and climate justice. They're all important, and it allows us to actually find that strategic catalyst that pushes us to a collective and more effective voice against systems that are quite literally destroying the earth and perpetuating an unsustainable and unequal society.
As the founder of the WeChat Project, which is an initiative to combat disinformation among the Asian diaspora, I imagine a feminist future for my community to look like one where we recognize that violence against Asian people is gendered as well as racialized. I imagine a future where Asian femmes and other gender-oppressed people are no longer commodified and fetishized and objectified, but rather we have autonomy over our bodies and our lives and our narratives. And I imagine a world where sex work is no longer stigmatized and criminalized, and Asian sex workers are protected, where the most marginalized in our community, trans folks, undocumented folks, elders, the working class, are protected as well, where ultimately, we keep ourselves safe.
Thank you, Eileen, for sharing what you're building for your community. And right now, we're going to talk to 3 more women who are using their platforms to bring awareness and fierceness to issues affecting the Asian American Pacific Islander community. They're literally building for their communities. To introduce their conversation and help us all learn how to be allies, please welcome former Secretary of State Hillary Rodham Clinton. Secretary, I'm so glad you're here.
Oh, thank you so much, Raquel, and thanks for all of your activism and leadership, and especially on behalf of the trans community. It's really important that your voice be out there along with all the rest of us to speak up and speak out. So thank you so much, Raquel. Oh my gosh, it's so great to see all of you, even though virtually. Let me introduce our panelists. First, Amanda Nguyen is the CEO. Sonal Shaw is the president of a brand new Asian American foundation launched this spring. And of course, Lana Condor is an award-winning actress and singer. Sonal, I'm going to start with you. Help us get situated here. The research tells us that 1 in 4 Asian Americans, which is an astonishing figure, have experienced incidents of hate. How does our country repair such pervasive trauma?
Well, first of all, Secretary Clinton, what an honor to be on a panel with you. You are such a leader, and I still remember the Beijing conference and your speech there, and it energized so many of us. So thank you for your leadership over the years and continuing leadership. I think it's so important to recognize that you're right, 25% of the Asian American community has faced incidences of hate. Even more stark is it's twice as many women as men. Second, to educate the American public about the Asian American community and who we are, and that our story is also a part of the American story. And then third, investing in research and knowing what is the data about the community. We're over 40 ethnicities, 20 Pacific Islander communities. We're not a monolithic, model minority myth. We are a diverse community that has been part of the American story for a long time. And to get past this trauma, I offer, our colleagues and our friends to say, get to know your neighbors, get to know who they are, talk to the communities. Don't be a bystander when something happens. Make sure you take the trainings and help participate in that. And speak out when you see it.
Amanda, you've worked on gender-based violence issues for years. That's really the work many of us know you for. But you've said that you sometimes feel like you've been asked to leave your race at the door. What do you mean by that?
A question I've been recently getting from journalists is, oh, well, what is it like to work on anti-Asian violence now? Is that new for you? And I've been Asian all along when I am in these spaces. The fact that we are in such a critical and, quite frankly, young dialogue about intersectionality, right? That nothing exists in isolation, that all of our liberation are tied together. And yes, of course, when we talk about gender-based violence, there are always other layers that are attached to that. In the Atlanta shooting, for instance, there still existed a conversation, a debate about whether or not it was racism or sexism. And for so many Asian women, it was both, and it was immediate. These issues absolutely are intertwined. And when we speak about these things, yes, I do fight for gender-based violence. But of course, as I do that, I'm doing it in my skin. I'm doing it recognizing that we must continually work on it.
And Lana, there's, of course, diversity in Asian American experiences. Obviously, we know that. But can you share us with a little bit of your own story as an adopted child in a predominantly white family, and talk about why it's so important for non-Asian people to appreciate the tremendous diversity of cultures How have you come to grips with that?
To me, my parents would always say, like, love is thicker than blood. And I was like, oh my gosh, thank you. But I think that, you know, when it comes to conversations about race, and particularly, you know, I think, at least for me in the past year, having these conversations with my parents has been very important because they're afraid for me. Hopefully they too will go to their friends and their family and continue to share that we are all human. Like we're living, breathing human beings that deserve to be able to feel safe. I mean, even one of my best friends, the night of the Georgia shooting, he had no idea that this was not the first violent attack against Asian Americans. Like he had no clue. He was like, oh wow, so weird. Why are you guys being attacked? This must be new. And I was like, no, this has been happening for a while. But that was very enlightening to me because I was like, you're my best friend, and that wasn't on the forefront of his mind.
So Nala, I want to come back to you because you've been outspoken about how the historical contributions of Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders don't make it into the history that our children are taught. What kind of curriculum would you like to see?
And just like every other history needs to be taught, our history is a multicultural history in this country. It's not a Asian American history or a Black history or Latinx history. It is a multicultural history, and we should be able to tell our history. We're also working in the state of Illinois to get legislation passed so Asian American history can even be taught in the schools. And that we're going to have to do state by state, but then train the teachers, talk to book publishers about including Asian American history in there. So it's a broad process, but it's important that we recognize that sometimes we're missing a lot of things in history, and just because it's in the history books doesn't mean it's included everything that should be in there. And our history is a part of the American history.
I hope that you will have a specific program to try to educate government leaders at the school board level, the state level, the federal level, because I'm already seeing resistance to teaching broad history in our schools.
I mean, Secretary, you are so right on about this. Is like, there's one thing about just going to the schools itself and getting curriculum passed, but another to actually educate government leaders on why it matters. And it also requires us as a community to go talk to our government leaders and saying we want it in there at the city level, at the state level, at the district levels, making sure that it gets into that.
And Lana, you've also talked about the importance of grieving with people who look like you. How did you create that community for yourself?
I think I've created a really wonderful community of Asian American actors and actresses, which has really helped me a lot when it comes to grieving with my community. And there was this moment where we were all talking and we were all on mute, and then we were asked to turn our mutes off. And we did, and all you heard was just sobs and just like total grief as we were processing everything that's been happening. And that, to me, as heartbreaking as it was very healing, because you know that we're stronger together, and you know that we're not alone, no matter how many times people or incidents make you feel like you are.
Yes, and remember how much better we all are when we do recognize that and support each other. Well, I know we're supposed to wrap up, but is there anything that any of you want to ask each other while you're all on the screen together?
Where do I go? What do I do? You know, like there's so much out there right now. What's a good resource to just keep the ball rolling?
I'm happy to add some resources for folks to check out. The first one I'd really recommend people go to is Call Back, because they have bystander intervention training.
I would urge people to watch the PBS documentary if you haven't seen it already about Asian Americans, because I think it's good to us also just educate ourselves as to who our community is, who are all the amazing people that have done amazing work in this country, especially women.
And just really briefly, do each of you want to say maybe one thing about what we can do, what I can do, what any of us can do to be better allies?
Let people know that it's real. and to recognize that the Asian American community is a part of the American community, recognize that, you know, we're not just a model minority, but we are a diverse set of communities that are part of the United States. We happen to be inconvenient Americans and inconvenient Americans. Convenient when we want to be seen as American, and inconvenient when something happens overseas, we're not seen as American. But we're American.
We are your neighbors, your essential workers, your doctors, but we shouldn't have to prove our merit to exist.
This month is very exciting for all of us, but it doesn't end in May.
Thanks to each of you for doing all that you are doing to get that message out. And I can't wait to support you. Thank you all very much.
Y'all, the comments are flying on that conversation, and rightly so. We have from Artemis M, bravo, Meteor. It's time to gather and transform the hate and violence into opportunity and growth. Speaking from personal experience, the family court systems need a lot of reform regarding violence, including verbal abuse against women. Thank you for that, Artemis. We also have from Simone H. The system has been designed to separate all minorities and out us against each other, to divide and conquer. Thank y'all. These are some powerful comments, and we're going to keep reading them tonight, but thank y'all for being engaged and just really being a part of this conversation, because we know this conversation and all of the ones we're having tonight are right on time. This morning, happily, the House of Representatives passed a new hate crime bill focused on anti-Asian attacks. You can check out more links and resources in the comments area. And remember, if you don't learn anything else tonight, learn this. We all have got to look out for each other. Now, to keep the love flowing, it's time for an original music video made especially for us tonight by rapper Regan Aaliyah.
1 for 21, it is Regan Aaliyah, and I got to write a song for you, which I think is pretty cool. So I hope you enjoy it, and here is to a fully inclusive feminist future.
I said the future is us. I said the future is us. They wanna fight with the giant. We turn them straight in the dust. I tell them, we waking them up. I tell them, the future is us. Look, ain't no holding us down. Whether we got the suit or the crown, trust me, I wear the pants in this house. Ain't no way you're taking me out. Tell the world I know what I do. Pinning me up to show and improve. They just walking with no tools. Get the job. Tell me what's new. Please don't test me. I got nothing to lose. Don't place no titles on my name. If I want it, I'll choose. Don't mistake what I say, calling it attitude. I ain't carrying no shame when I know it's the truth. They said the future is ours. I said the future is us. They wanna fight with the giant. We turn them straight in the dust. I tell them, we waking them up. I tell them, the future is us.
That was Regan Aaliyah, the first of her name. And honey, I want to get in front of a fisheye lens sometime soon and show y'all what I can do, because that gave me all of my life. And I know y'all are giving us so much love in the comments. We have from Tessa R, the future is us. Absolutely. From Chantal M, sis is fire. What a queen. I couldn't agree any more. What a great way to take us into the next section of our 21 for 21 confab. This part is all about our personal futures. Beyond policy and legislation, it's all about how and where we live, our most personal relationships, how we rest, how we date, child, and everything else. And still ahead, we have Roxane Gay, Gloria Steinem, Amanda Gorman, as well as Saba Hodir, one of the founders of the Me Too movement in Egypt. But right now, we're going to talk some more about the impatience that propels us into action. Please welcome Academy Award-winning filmmaker, Sharmeen Obed-Chinoy.
Hi everyone, I'm coming to you from my studio in Karachi. As a documentary filmmaker, I often think about what a better tomorrow will look like for women and girls around the world. And the women I have interviewed have taught me something very important. For there to be real change, women have to start getting more impatient. Let me explain. In 2015, I met an incredible woman, Tabassum Adnan, working for change in her community in the valley of Swat in Pakistan. Tabassum was attending a women's empowerment conference when she realized that only men were dispensing justice in her community, and that made her very angry. She decided to form a women's jirga or council, taking up overlooked cases. When Tabassum started, she didn't have a plan and she had a lot of opposition, but she channeled her anger and her impatience and was able to create real change. I think Tabassum's real legacy has been that she has taught women in her community that they do not need to seek permission. Being an impatient woman comes with its own host of issues. There are online threats and malicious campaigns made by right-wing press against me. People call me a feminist like it's a swear word. But I take all of this as a sign of success. After all, being a big pain in the ass is how things change. If I wasn't making an impact, they wouldn't be trying to silence me. And I know that I'm not alone. I learned as a child that if you speak the truth, the world will stand with you. So I implore you, be a pain in the ass. Be impatient. Our time will not come if we seek permission.
I'm Chantal Martin. I'm an artist based in Jersey City. Let's talk about the future of art. When I was a kid, I didn't know being an artist was an option. There weren't any artists or galleries or museums around me. I was actually even the first person in my family to finish school. So the idea of being an artist was something that was completely outside of my imagination. So a fun fact about me is I'm a proud dyslexic, but I didn't know I was dyslexic until I was in my 20s and I was at art school and I was surrounded by so many other people who were also dyslexic. So when I look back, now I know why I didn't go to the library. Now I know why I always failed my spelling test. Now I know why I couldn't really read those books confidently. And I was punished.
It wasn't until a few years ago when I was thinking back about myself as a kid that I had the memory of Comic Sans. Jokes aside, actually a really great font for kids with dyslexia. Comic Sans wasn't that font that was in newspapers or in books or in these scary documents that I avoided. It was quite the opposite. It's a font that feels like it's handwritten, feels super familiar. It feels something like I could have created myself. All of this a few years ago got me thinking about creating my own font. But I saw so many hurdles for me to get there. Because there's such a barrier to enter this industry, we're only ever really seeing a select amount of fonts from a select amount of people. And we would really benefit from opening that up.
So I'm launching my own font, and it's called Chantal Sans.
This might just seem like a font, but it's so much more. There's so much to this font to discover in it. And it's important for me when I look back at my body of work
There's always been words, there's always been fonts, there's always been typefaces within the work that I'm creating. And I think it will be a magical place if I can create that, turn that into a font and release it out there in the world. So how does this all relate to the future of art? I want the future of art to encapsulate three main things: accountability, transparency, and responsibility. You know, we can have art that costs lots of money and is in big fancy institutions, but the truth is we will all benefit when art is actually for all of us and it is accessible. Chantal Sands is an open font license. It is available to everyone. If you are a young woman, a young girl, a young anyone out there in the world, and you are trying to think about what's next, you know, the future of art is the future of the world. When we are more creative, when we are more inspired, when we are more exposed to art that truly questions and truly allows us to think and truly allows us to explore, that is the future.
So when I envision the future for girls and women around the world, I would hope that girls and women with disabilities are included in that future. We sometimes tend to forget that women with disabilities are also women, and we're usually excluded from our gender equality movements or strategies. We are one of the most discriminated groups around the world. We tend to live 10 times more violence than other women. So it's very important to shine a light on the issues that we face every day. And I would hope that every girl or women with disabilities in the future would understand that we're not these broken beings and that our existence is this kind of tragedy.
In a feminist future, I would live, I think, my truly best life, because I would no longer have to be thinking strictly about what it means to live in this world, not only as a woman, but as a Black woman. And I think as feminists, that's what we're working toward, a world where we are allowed to live as women without having to spend so much of our emotional energy on the realities of negotiating a misogynistic world as women. In a feminist future, I think we've dealt with things like pay inequity and sexual violence and reproductive freedom. We are supported in our choice to have children or not, and things like subsidized childcare and a universal and fair minimum wage above $20 is a reality. It's not that we will be living in a utopia, because utopia isn't the goal, but we will certainly be living in a world where women feel equal to men and where gender is less of a constraint and more of an identity that we are allowed to inhabit joyfully, and where we are enabled and empowered to live our lives to the fullest extent. For those of us who are women of color, especially Black women, we would no longer have to deal with so many of the burdens of systemic oppression that affect Black women in really pernicious ways. We deal with so many prejudices and stereotypes, and all too often we are told that we will save the world, and no one ever seems to consider that we might be saving ourselves. I don't really know what I would do in a feminist future that would be so ideal, but I would love the opportunity to figure it out. And I think most women would. I think that a lot of us expend a great deal of energy trying to live in the world as it is. And if that energy were freed up, I think that we would be creating incredibly important things, and also things that are just fun. Like myself, I would just write a cookbook, and I would spend a lot of my time developing recipes and spending time among beautiful food, and it seems really thrilling, and I hope that I get to that future.
Roxanne, as soon as that cookbook is out, let us know, because I want to be the first on that pre-order list. I am so here for everything you just said, and I'm also here for this next conversation with Brittany Packnett Cunningham. She's an activist and host of the Meteor podcast, Undistracted. I was a guest on that. You know, I'm not trying to make it about me, but, you know, shout out to me. Joining Brittany is writer, director, and comedian Trayvon Free, who just won an Oscar for his film, Two Distant Strangers. Both of them will be discussing police brutality and performing masculinity, something I did for like a third of my life.
Hey, y'all. I am so delighted to be here this evening to talk about what an intersectional feminist future actually looks like. But, you know, if we're ever going to achieve true gender equity, we need everybody on board, and that includes men too. Feminism is not just about changing the ways we raise girls, it's also about redefining masculinity. We need men to be free too, y'all. And I know Trayvon has thought a lot about this in his personal life, in the projects he creates, in the words he speaks. I'm so excited to talk to my homie about the fight for both racial and gender liberation, because as I like to say, no one is free until we're all free. So welcome, Trayvon. I am so grateful to be here with you. First of all, congratulations on your Oscar. It's pretty fire.
Thank you. It's still setting in.
You are not new to this. You are true to this because you were already an Emmy-winning comedy writer. You wrote for The Daily Show. You wrote for Full Frontal with Samantha Bee. How did the idea of making Two Distant Strangers actually come to you?
You know, it started with seeing the repetition of, you know, Black people being killed on television and in the media. And it put that feeling into my head, and I said it out loud to Zaria. I said, you know, this feels like the worst version of Groundhog's Day.
Two Distant Strangers is a fictional take on a very real, seemingly endless loop of Black Americans being killed by the police, like you've already said. And I'm very sure that some viewers would hope that things would have turned out differently for the main character, a Black man named Carter. But spoiler alert, y'all, or perhaps it isn't a spoiler alert, he gets killed by the white cop every time. So What did you really want viewers to understand about the reality that Black people face?
I wanted people to understand that the constant gaslighting that we get as Black Americans when we're told each one of these instances would have not happened had you done some performative behavior differently, or had you complied with this or done that. I wanted people to understand just how like full of shit those things really are. Sorry if I can say that.
Because it's true.
Right, like to understand how ridiculous those assertions are, and to present it to people in the way that we feel it. It's all the things that we have to take with us every single day out into the world in order to survive, and also perform and live and be parents and, you know, be employees or be bosses or whatever it is. We have to do all that with all those stresses on top of carrying this with us every single day. So that was kind of what I wanted people to take away from it.
I know that we are resilient and yet wish we didn't have to be this resilient. So, I mean, do you see any solutions from this epidemic of police violence against Black people? Like, do you see a way out of the loop?
You know, I think there is a way out. I don't think it's one thing. I think it's a combination of things. It's our efforts to change our cities and states on the local level. So we have to first start by recognizing the system itself is broken, and we have to recognize where we can start to repair it. And I think that starts with your mayors and your local city councils and the people who are giving the money to these police departments, and looking at what that money is actually doing for the citizens in those cities. And so I don't have the cure-all, which is why the movie ends the way it does. But I think there are definitely steps we need to take as citizens of this country in order to get ourselves to a point where not only are the police not killing 1,000 people of all colors every year, that they aren't killing so many Black people unnecessarily.
I mean, this journey is obviously intersected with all the other oppressions, right? So I actually want to shift a little bit. You've said in conversations we've had and publicly that you consider yourself a feminist. So I want to know how you define your feminism and why do you feel it's important to actually fight racial, sexual, and gender oppression all at the same time?
You know, for me, I define my feminism as the necessary push for the equality of women everywhere. I know that the rising tide of that boat only helps not only myself but the world. And I know, right? I mean, I know firsthand what women are capable of when given the opportunity to not be hindered by a patriarchal oppression for the sake of their gender. I've had the experience of I tell people all the time, my experience at Full Frontal was beyond incredible because I was working with 90% women, maybe even 95% women on that show. And having come off a show that was probably 90% men, it was such a night and day experience. As a man in that space, you recognize all the ways in which you have to perform as a man in a space filled with men that you don't have to do in a space filled with women. It opened me up in a way that I wish every man could experience. There's this idea that somehow the equality of a woman equals the hindrance of a man. And it's that you see that same idea when it comes to race. Oh, if we give Black people this many positions or this much power, it's at the detriment of white people.
Yeah.
We know it's not true.
How do we actually create a new generation of men who are not constrained, not limited by those old-fashioned ideas of hyper masculinity?
You know, I think it starts at home. It's how we raise our boys, right? If we stop raising a generation of boys who don't cry, boys who are tough, boys who have to perform the script as it's been written, the moment you throw that script out and your son comes to you in tears and you don't tell him to immediately wipe them away and to stop and to understand that your masculinity is not tied to your toughness. It's the thing that's killing you. It's the poison in the well of manhood.
You openly identify as bisexual. I'm interested what your own process in coming to question gender expectations has been like. How have you been thinking through what expectations have been placed on you and your performance of manhood?
It was in my late teens when I was finally understanding who I was into my early 20s. I recognized where so many things I had been taught in so many ways I had been taught to be bumped up against who I felt I was. You know, for so long, I've been seen as this large masculine athlete who is what people hold up as the pinnacle of straightness and heterosexuality. And now I have an opportunity to debunk that myth with my existence, right? I get to show up to a place and defy everything you know or think you know about sexuality and what straightness looks like.
I mean, when we talk about the intersections of who any of us are, I'm curious how you think the ideas of Black masculinity and white masculinity differ.
Yeah, you know, I think because Black masculinity is so rooted in how we got to this country in the first place, in order to be Black, you can't appear weak in the face of whiteness or white supremacy. And that is something we've carried with us since we gained our freedom in this country. And it's in our music, it's in our movies, it's in almost every facet of Black popular culture, and even our own home lives. It is when you walk out that door as a Black man or woman in a lot of families, you have to be tough, you have to be strong, you have to be all these things. And it makes sense because we have to protect ourselves. There was a period of time in this country where we were being openly murdered, lynched, killed for the color of our skin. And so we had to steel ourselves against that.
I mean, well, we're talking about young Trayvon, do you have advice for young men today that you wish maybe you would have heard back in the day yourself? Do you have a word for a young Trayvon, a word for all the young Trayvons in the world?
Yeah, I mean, I guess if I had to boil it down to a word, I would say, truth. Like live in what feels true to you. Like, because there is always going to be what you were told and how you were told to be. But if you have the choice to honor your truth at an early age, honor it, because it will serve you and the world so much better as you become an adult in this society. It will ultimately create a better society for everyone when people have the ability to not only discover freedom, but to grow with it, to grow into it.
That's the word of the day, kids. Truth. Trayvon, thank you for bringing it to us like you always do. If you are watching, you can continue this conversation on our upcoming episode of Undistracted out this Thursday on whatever platform you listen to your podcast on. Thanks for listening. Thanks for being. Thanks for doing. And Trayvon, thanks for being you.
Thank you so much, Brittany. I love you so much.
I love you too.
Y'all are hanging in there with us tonight for so many powerful and strong conversations. I just want to take a second to look at some of these comments because y'all are going in this chat. So we have Maria C., who said, we have to allow folks to express their emotions without judgment. She also said, or they also said, our emotions are our internal guidance system. Love that. We also have from Aisha J. This conversation means so much to me as a Black woman. It's honestly hard to express all the power it's giving me to forge on. Amazing. Now, we can't talk about the future without looking to our past, our glorious past. We are all here because of our foremothers, like the women of the Combahee River Collective and Grace Lee Boggs, rest in power. And many of my trans foremothers, like Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera. So here we have one of my favorite bras from New York, creator and activist Alana Glazer, serving you the words of a literary foremother. See how we did that? Ursula K. Le Guin.
Tonight is about imagining a feminist future, which is the only kind of future I want to live in. These are the words of Ursula K. Le Guin, the American author and science fiction trailblazer who spent her life investigating the future. She spoke them in 1983. Maybe we've had enough words of power and talk about the battle of life. Maybe we need some words of weakness. Instead of saying now that I hope you will all go forth and forge a triumphant career and be a success and everything, instead of talking about power, what if I talked like a woman right here in public? Success is somebody else's failure. Success is the American dream. We can keep dreaming because most people in most places live wide awake in the terrible reality of poverty. So no, I do not wish you success. I don't even want to talk about it. I want to talk about failure because you are human beings. You're going to meet failure. You're going to meet disappointment, injustice, betrayal, and irreparable loss. You'll work for possessions and find they possess you. You will find yourself, as I know you already have, in dark places, alone and afraid. What I hope for you is that you will be able to live there, in the dark place, to live in the place that our rationalizing culture of success denies, calling it a place of exile, uninhabitable, foreign. Well, we're already foreigners. Women as women are largely excluded from, alien to, the self-declared male norms of this society, where human beings are called man. The only respectable God is male. The only direction is up. So that's their country. Let's explore our own. Women have lived and have been despised for living. The a whole side of life that includes and takes responsibility for helplessness, weakness, and illness, the valley of the shadow, the depths of life. Well, so that is our country. So what I hope for you is that you live there not as prisoners, ashamed of being women, consenting captives of a psychopathic social system, but as natives, that you will be at home there, keep house there, that you will do your work there. I hope you are never victims, but I hope you have no power over other people. And when you fail and are defeated and in pain and in the dark, then I hope you will remember that darkness is your country. It's where you live, where no wars are fought and no wars are won, but where the future is.
Hi everyone, I'm Mina Harris. I am a lawyer, an author, an entrepreneur, and I'm the founder of Phenomenal. And I am the daughter of Maya, the granddaughter of Shamala, and more recently, the mother of Amara and Leela. Here's a brief 10-point mother-daughter manifesto, my 10 for 21, if you please. Number 1, teach your children about activism from an early age. When I make a donation or march or support a friend, I teach my girls what I'm doing so they can see activism in motion. Number 2, reframe the language that tries to block girls' path to leadership. Don't tell her to be quiet or that she's too loud. Tell her to use her inside voice. Don't tell her that she's too much. Tell her she's energetic and that is a good thing, but mama really needs to rest right now. So please just let me sleep for a few minutes while you make a drawing quietly. Number 3, stop using plastic straws. That's just good for everybody. Number 4, bring men into the conversation about supporting and elevating women. They have to be a part of the conversation. They have to be a part of change. Number 5, let's talk about maternity leave. Let's talk about parental leave. In the United States, 1 in 4 women are back at work 10 days after having a baby. 10 days. Moving on to number 6, we need to do something about equal access to maternity care and health care for women of color. Number 7, more children's books that feature people of color to teach kindness and empathy and community building. Number 8, reframe the conversations about women's work. We tell our kids that Mrs. Claus is an entrepreneur who runs the family business. She's a CEO. Not only is this true, but it's also a doorway to talking about other important things like fairness and dignity for workers. Number 9, celebrate difference, like really celebrate it. Point it out, celebrate it. When my curly-headed daughter, Amara, started noticing my straight hair, we immediately had a conversation about how beautiful and awesome her hair is, and that even though it is different from mine or from the blonde girls at school, that is in no way less beautiful. That's a small example, but sometimes those small conversations have a huge impact. Number 10, finally, continue to speak out and stand up for women everywhere. To make positive change in the world, no matter how small. I'm going to try to do as many of these things as possible. My grandmother told me you may be the first to do many things, but make sure you're not the last. So I guess we can check back in 30 years to see how we're doing. Let's meet back here in 2051. I'll send a Zoom invite and bring your daughters, unless they've, just given birth or are busy pursuing their purpose and ambitions and whatever the hell they want to do. For God's sakes, please let them sleep.
When I envision the future for women and girls like myself, I hope for a day where I can walk out my front door and not have any doubt in the back of my mind that I will return safe and sound. Every day, trans kids like myself wake up and leave their houses with no guarantee that they will be safe, seen, loved, celebrated, and accepted. I am working every day towards making that wish into our reality.
My mother, Chela, first learned of the promise of America in the linoleum corridors of Guillermo Almenara Hospital in Peru, where my right leg was amputated after a car pinned me against the wall. I was 2.5 and learned to walk with 2 crutches, a mechanical prosthesis, and a song my mother taught me. Yo tengo una piernita que se pone y se saca, se pone y se saca. I have a leg that you put on and take off, put on and take off. Chela's anthem assured me that I was cooler than everyone else. After all, I could take off my leg. When I think about our American story, I believe it was born in my mother's heart that night as she stood over my hospital bed. Chela was determined that I'd reach my full potential, and eventually the only place that could contain her vision was here in America. Most immigrants to the US carry with them this deep belief, sometimes unconscious, in the possibility of America, in the promise of liberty and justice for all. Reality sets in early in our journey when we are confronted with the gaping chasm between that belief and our lived experience. Peg leg, border hopper, go back to where you came from. Herein lies our choice. The work to claim America before it claims us begins in our hearts, when we confront the deep sorrow and terror with a forged determination to belong. Undocumented, unafraid, undocumented, unafraid. If citizenship is belonging, legal status was a crucial step forward for the undocumented young people who eventually won DACA. But in my view, we were already enacting the highest expression of citizenship in our demand for that legal status by calling on the government to live up to its ideals of liberty, justice, and equality. Here, I think of James Baldwin, who famously wrote, "I love America more than any other country in this world. And exactly for this reason, I insist on the right to criticize her perpetually." We claimed this country, which calls itself a land of immigrants, before this country claimed us. Citizenship is, in fact, the work of recognizing that cruel contradiction, that distance between ideals and reality, and then taking action to make that distance smaller. We still are ahead of the law, like all justice movements, anticipating and prefiguring the changes that eventually come, claiming space for more freedom for more people before the courts and the legislatures catch up. And because we claim this country, we must see clearly its injustices beyond our own lived experiences. Citizenship is a category of belonging, and belonging in the United States has always been circumscribed by the boundaries of whiteness. The full promise of citizenship, its political, economic, and social benefits, has never been realized for Black Americans, for Indigenous people, or for communities of color in the US, who face persistent discrimination in housing, education, employment, policing, and all other arenas of life where the mark of belonging isn't actually citizenship, but skin that is racially coded as white. When undocumented people demand a path to citizenship and the case for our formal entry into American citizenry, we've sometimes idealized the legal category of citizenship, made it a symbol of the safety, the rights, and the belonging that we long for. But we know that's not the whole truth. It doesn't mean we discard our demand for a legal status that's otherwise out of reach. But we must also commit ourselves to the fight to make the promise of full citizenship real for all Americans, including our sisters and brothers whose families have lived here for generations, but who still can't access the political, the economic, and the social benefits of true belonging in the US. The present and future work of the immigrant justice movement is to ensure that our call for citizenship is rooted in a vision for racial justice, for gender justice, for economic justice, and that all our actions are oriented toward that vision. This is our next frontier. Now, it won't be easy.
It isn't easy to imagine a future that doesn't yet exist, and then also figure out how we get from here to there. Miriam Kaba and Kelly Hayes have written, "We live in a society that has been locked into a false sense of inevitability. It's time for a jailbreak of the imagination in order to make the impossible possible." On the hardest of days, when my imagination is jailed, restrained by pessimism and politics, I think about my mother, Chela, and the millions like her who sacrifice their dreams and make ours their own, who pound the pavement from sunrise to sunset with English dictionaries in their backpacks on their way to clean homes when they don't have a car, and who teach us to rise above cynicism and to reject pessimism and to never, ever give up hope, because we came here to fulfill America's promise.
Hi, I'm Philip Picardi, and I'm here with the Meteor to help explain how we can reclaim religion to build a more feminist future. If you've ever heard the song God is a Woman by Ariana Grande, then you already know exactly what I'm talking about. It's this idea that religion right now is this vehicle of the patriarchy. It's been used to suppress people, discriminate against people. It's been used as a tool for genocide against Indigenous Americans. And it's generally used as a way to castigate people and other people, rather than actually being of God, which is all about welcoming people and supporting one another. At its core, before men ruined it, religion was something that was a positive force for good, right? Religion was feminist. And if we want to build a future that has a soul, right, that feels nourishing and supportive and protective of each other, of course there's a role for spirituality in a feminist future. But I, especially as a gay man who grew up Catholic, I understand why some of us may want to do away with religion altogether. I once was there. Now somehow I'm going to Harvard Divinity School to really learn the exact opposite. And I'm really excited because I really do believe that there's a role for the soul in all of this work, that at its core, all of the things feminism has taught me as a man and has challenged me to be a better man and to better show up for women, all of those things are about soul work, you know? And so it's amazing to have the possibility and this incredible platform to think about what religion could look like as a tool to uplift and not suppress people. And that's why I'm so glad to be in such amazing company today to help explain to you how we can do that. First and foremost, ancient religions often prized and centered the feminine as a way to connect to spirituality. Take it from my friend Chani, the amazing, world-renowned astrologer and New York Times bestselling author.
Thank you, Phil. Yeah, if we think of patriarchy, we can also understand that it's a really new concept and a really new paradigm. And women have always been at the center of culture and the creation of culture. And one of the main things that has always been at the center of culture creation is spiritual ritual. It took a great effort, actually, to extract us from all of those different things. And now we are in the process of reclaiming what was already there, reclaiming our birthright, reclaiming the roles that we've always had.
Number two, we don't need to necessarily throw away everything that we've been taught or value about religion in order to bring it into our more feminist future. A lot of our ancient religious texts are actually feminist by nature, but they've been revised by patriarchal men to diminish women's roles in the church. That's why I love the feminist theology of Reverend Jackie Lewis, whose teachings help us to actually look at ancient texts from a much more modern and relevant perspective. Reverend, thanks for being here.
Phil, it's good to be with you today. I love being a feminist teacher, writer, theologian. In fact, I almost lost my faith a few years ago because I felt a little boxed in and like I couldn't listen well for the still speaking God. But God is still speaking. My denomination actually has a comma to represent that. And so when I think about these ancient texts through a feminist lens, I'm especially thinking about Jesus and this encounter he has with a Syrophoenician or a Canaanite woman. She wants her daughter to be healed. And Jesus says to her, this food is not for the dogs, it's for the children, which is to say he's come for the people of Israel and not for her as an outsider. as an interloper, if you will. But she argues back, even the dogs deserve the crumbs from the master's table. And Jesus changes his mind. Now, that's not a good look for Jesus, right? Calling her a dog. But I think the gospel writers leave this text in the Bible because it shows us how Jesus is changed by this woman, how he is transformed by this woman, even further along his feminist journey. Feminists have been for millennia arguing with patriarchy to transform it into a living word for all of us.
The third thing about imagining spirituality for a more feminist future is that just like we're pro-choice about everything else about a woman's bodily autonomy, we should practice the same about a woman's spiritual autonomy. I'm grateful to have my friend Noor here to help me explain more.
Thanks, Bill. I totally agree. We should absolutely respect a woman's spiritual autonomy. And fun fact, I practice the religion of Islam, and my faith as a Muslim is one that has always encouraged me to maintain that spiritual autonomy, to go on this journey, to question things, to question the things that we are taught, and to find truth for ourselves. It's often misrepresented that Islam is an oppressive religion. But in fact, there's a verse in the Quran and that says there is no compulsion in religion. We actually are the first faith to give women rights like to vote, to own land, to inherit, and so many more. So I'm really grateful that I have been able to maintain my own spiritual autonomy, and I wish that for everyone else.
Religion, just like anything else in life, should absolutely be an option for people to participate in. And in order to imagine religion for a feminist future, it's our duty to make sure it feels safer and more welcoming for a broader range of people to connect to their spirituality and their inner power.
Hello, my name is Angel Harris, and I'm a criminal court judge in New Orleans, Louisiana. When I imagine the future for women and girls, I envision a world where young Black girls aren't being told they can't do something simply because they are young and Black. I see a world where Black women and girls are empowered to dictate their own paths in life and aren't forced to prove their worth at every turn. Most importantly, I see a world where even when we are doing the hard work, we find time to love and care for ourselves.
Confession. I was raised Catholic, which I think is a full statement within itself. So I am very grateful for any conversation on expansive spirituality. To get us into this final section of our 21 for 21, I am giving you the voice and the talent of singer-songwriter Madison McFerrin. And I'll be reading your comments like we've been doing all night. So if you have any pressing questions for me, now is the time to put them in that chat.
Hey everybody, I'm Madison McFerrin, and I'm so excited to be here at 21 for 21 with all of these amazing artists and activists. I'm gonna do my songs called Try, and I hope it inspires all of you guys to try. That's really why I'm singing it, because, you know, times are tough right now, but we all should still get out there and do our very best. And I hope this song gets you moving, gets you grooving. We're gonna have some fun. I know it's a fight to try and listen, 'cause I might not know what to say. Selfishly, I'm worried you might run and hide. Selflessly, you're learning. I hold on to pride, but no sacrifice comes without mistakes. We could fly. Take a leap of faith. It's time to decide. Try. Try. Try out here feeling scared, but at least I'm living unprepared to walk away. I won't let the same thing, no, stop us every time. But why is it that changing, oh, feels like a goodbye, but no sacrifice comes without mistakes, and we could fly. Take a leap of faith, look inside, oh, don't you hesitate, we should fly. Take a leap of faith, it's time to decide. Try. 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 See, you are what you're waiting for. Just open up your eyes, it's time to see. What is it you're waiting for? It's time to open up your eyes and see. You are what you're waiting for. Just open up your eyes, it's time to see. It's time to see. It's time to see.
Wow. Oh, thank you so much, Madison, for that amazing musical journey. So we have some beautiful questions coming in. One from Andrea C., which says, which future feminist leaders do you find the most inspiring? Oh, there are so many. I have to say, I mean, I talked about some of my trans foremothers, but some of the trans folks coming up are doing some powerful things. We had Sage from earlier discussing so much powerful stuff. We had Queen Jean, who is doing some amazing protesting. There's so many, I can't narrow it down. Another question we have is, okay. All right, so this one is about what is my favorite power anthem, which is very hard. I might have to be cliche on this one and say, I'm every woman. And for me, it doesn't matter. Shaka, Whitney Houston, one of the house mixes, definitely one of the house mixes. And then the last question I'm seeing from KA that says, share your favorite self-care practice. Oh, there's so much I could say, but for me, self-care is so much about the people that I've surrounded myself with. So I like to say my sisters and my siblings are my self-care. Yes. All right. So we are in the section on big dreams and even bigger solutions. Our first big dreamer is Andrea James, who has a bold plan for ending incarceration for women and girls.
I'm Andrea James, and I'm here to talk to you about ending the incarceration of women and girls, why this is important, and how we can get there. I grew up wanting to become a criminal defense attorney because I wanted to make a difference, and I thought that that would be the perfect career for me to create that change. And I did. I became a criminal defense lawyer. I got in trouble doing that work. I made a mistake. I was afraid to tell anybody about that mistake. I was ultimately sentenced as a lawyer to serve a 2-year federal prison sentence for wire fraud. That first night that I slept in the prison, It was just very difficult. And I kept thinking about my children and what must this little baby be thinking. And it was the women in that prison that got me through the transition from learning how to navigate and live in a prison, to be separated from my children and my husband and my parents and my family, to surviving and making my way through a 2-year prison sentence. And these are the same women that are the founders of the National Council with me. And these are the women that I work with to this very day to end the incarceration of women and girls. As an abolitionist, we just don't believe that police and prisons are effective. They cause further harm, and that we know that there are better alternatives, and that the purpose of prisons has only had outcomes that cause further harm. We need to be smarter about what we do in this country to address the harm that people may cause. We built a prison every 10 days from 1996 to 2008 and crammed it full of Black and brown and poor people. If it worked, we wouldn't continue to have the level of harm that people cause to one another in this country. Close to 90% of women who are currently incarcerated and have had the experience of incarceration are women who have been the victims of sexual violence. They're women who have been victims of interpersonal violence.
Free her! Free her now!
Reimagining safety is about reimagining communities. Reimagining communities is about the women and the girls who have carried the weight of the criminal legal system in our community, having the opportunity to build alternate systems that help us to achieve our goal of beauty and joy and an ability to thrive like other communities are afforded. And so we know that we can do this. We have the power to do it. Feminism is the fuel. It's an ideology that is taking over the world because we all understand that we need something better than what's been leading us up till now.
9 out of 10 women in Egypt are victims of sexual assault and sexual harassment. That means 99.3% of all women in Egypt leave their homes knowing very well that the odds are stacked against them. Women in Egypt are fighting other forms of violence as well, such as FGM, marital rape, child marriages, honor killing, or domestic violence. What a feminist future for me would look like is that one day we are all, as women, capable of sitting down and having a cup of tea together, and we are discussing anything else because we're no longer discussing the violence, and we're no longer discussing our oppression, because that has ended. The violence has ended. And we're just sitting down and having a cup of tea together.
We have been talking about impatience all night. Women stepping up with urgency and purpose. And we're about to meet another woman who is stepping up to run the highest office in her country, Francia Marquez of Colombia. To introduce her, welcome a fellow disruptor and activist, the co-founder of the original Women's March and another founding member of the Meteor, Paula Mendoza. Let's listen in.
Francia Marquez is from Jolombo, Colombia, a small village from my home country. I've known Francia for over 10 years, and in that time, she has become one of the most formidable and important human rights defenders in all of Colombia. She has stood up to multinational corporations, to paramilitaries, and even her own government because they wanted to displace her and her community for the gold that they wanted to extract from the land. For her courageous and tireless work, Francia has received multiple death threats and even on one occasion, an assassination attempt. But this has not silenced Francia. Instead, it has propelled her forward. And today, Francia Marquez is running for president of Colombia. It is my honor and my pleasure to be able to sit down and talk to Francia about her vision of her country and her vision of how feminism plays a role in it. When I spoke to Francia, Colombia was in the throes of violence. There was protests and state violence against the people protesting. Her internet connection is not strong, but her message is. Hola, Francia. Es un placer hablar contigo. Gracias por estar con nosotras.
Hola, Paola, muchas gracias.
La primera pregunta, ¿por qué estás lanzándose a la presidencia de Colombia?
Creo que han sido muchos años de lucha, ¿sí? De resistencia por la dignidad, por la justicia, por la paz, ¿sí? Y hemos sido los pueblos indígenas, los pueblos campesinos, los pueblos afrodescendientes, las mujeres que hemos estado enfrentando a una política de muerte que ha estado desde que se creó este Estado-nación, ¿sí? Llevamos 300 años de colonización y 200 años como país, como nación, pero las situaciones hoy todavía siguen siendo situaciones similares. En muchos territorios hoy la gente no tiene agua potable, pero le llega el mercurio que envenena las pocas fuentes de agua a las cuales tenemos acceso. Y nuestros niños y niñas hoy están muriendo, ¿sí? De enfermedades, de desnutrición. Muchos territorios no llegan posibilidades de tener condiciones básicas para una vida digna, pero llega el desarrollo, ¿sí? El desarrollo que no es para las comunidades, que no es para la mayoría de los colombianos y colombianas, que no es para nuestros hijos, ¿sí? Ese desarrollo no se piensa con la gente de abajo. Ese desarrollo no se piensa con la gente empobrecida, que es la mayoría en este país. Es un desarrollo basado en la acumulación, ¿sí? En la expropiación, en la miseria, en el miedo, porque de ese desarrollo hace parte la violencia, el conflicto armado y la guerra que nos ha tocado que soportar por tantos años, ¿sí? Pero en nombre de ese desarrollo nos siguen expropiando nuestra dignidad humana, expropiando nuestra condición humana. Y esas son las situaciones a las que nos hemos estado resistiendo. Esas son las situaciones que hemos estado denunciando. Esas son las situaciones a las que nos enfrentamos cuando salimos a paros como los de ahora. Y por eso estamos colocando nuestro nombre a decir, vamos a disputarnos el poder. Vamos a reconocer que como pueblo somos el poder, ¿sí? Y que el voto es importante para transformar. Aquí nos han vendido una democracia desde hombres blancos privilegiados que nos han gobernado, pero una democracia que nos resulta vacía a los pueblos, que no nos dice nada. Es el momento histórico de asumir el desafío como mujeres, como pueblos, como comunidades, como gente de abajo, que somos las mayorías de dirigir nuestro propio destino, de hacer nuestro propio camino, y por eso pues hemos tomado la decisión colectiva de colocar mi nombre en una candidatura a la presidencia de este país.
Y todos esos problemas por los cuales tú has hablado y vivido y liderado y sufrido son desde hace siglos y son problemas complicados, difíciles. Y también hay gente que dice que tú no tienes la experiencia de ser presidente o presidenta de Colombia. ¿Qué le dices a esas personas?
Bueno, yo creo que eso yo lo he escuchado no desde ahora, yo lo he escuchado desde niña, ¿sí? Yo soy una mujer afrodescendiente y he vivido el racismo, ¿sí? El racismo estructural en carne propia. Entonces, en este país no ha habido jamás una mujer presidente, y menos, ni siquiera se les ocurre pensar en que una mujer afrodescendiente puede ser presidente. Entonces, porque no le ven la capacidad. Sin embargo, pues los hombres blancos, privilegiados, sí, pues yo no sé, la experiencia que han tenido, que me digan a mí, porque esa experiencia a mí no me ha permitido vivir en dignidad ni a mi familia, ni a mi pueblo, ni a este país. ¿Sí? Entonces, ¿de cuál experiencia me hablan? ¿Sí? De la experiencia que estamos viviendo hoy, donde se creen estos machos con el poder de sacar las fuerzas militares para que se volquen en contra de su pueblo, para que maten, ¿sí?, la vida de la gente que juraron ante la Constitución proteger. De esa experiencia me hablan, pues esa es una experiencia que no quiero aprender, que no quiero tener, y yo quiero construir una experiencia de gobernanza desde abajo para este país, que permita cerrar las brechas de inequidad y desigualdad, que se ponga en favor la vida, en el centro la vida, que sea capaz de colocar el diálogo en el centro para resolver todos estos conflictos armados, que se han mantenido, porque la política de la muerte necesita la guerra, necesita la violencia para estar ahí, ¿no? Y en ese sentido, pues esta gente vende violencia primero, ofrece violencia o genera violencia y después vende seguridad. Y esa es la seguridad democrática que hemos tenido. Y esa es la seguridad democrática que hoy está matando a la gente en la calle. Esa es la experiencia que a mí me están reclamando. Pues esa es una experiencia que yo no quiero tener. ¿Sí? Yo tengo otras experiencias. Y es la experiencia de la lucha. Y es la experiencia de la dignidad. Y es la experiencia que se construye colectivamente con los pueblos. Y aquí en este país hay hombres y mujeres con capacidad para transformar las situaciones de injusticia, de violencia, y las capacidades para transformar esta política de muerte que ya no aguantamos.
Estamos hablando de muchas cosas difíciles que están pasando hoy en día en Colombia. Estamos hablando sobre la historia colombiana, lo que se está viviendo hoy en día, lo que ha sufrido y sobrevivido y luchado tu comunidad de la toma en el Cauca. Y también estamos hablando de alguna esperanza que tenemos para otro mundo. Quisiera preguntarte qué es tu visión feminista en unas cuantas frases para Colombia y para el mundo.
Yo creo que ver tanta gente en la calle es un acto de que esta Colombia va a cambiar también. Doloroso todas las vidas que estamos perdiendo. Es muy triste. Y yo creo que esto está cambiando. Yo creo que hay como un mensaje importante que está llegando y que pues yo tengo la esperanza de que efectivamente este país va a cambiar, y si cambia este país, pues también tengo la esperanza de que nuestra lucha pueda transformar este mundo.
Muchas gracias, Francia. Cuídate. Gracias por tu liderazgo y espero verte en como presidente de Colombia.
Gracias, Paola. Ese es el desafío. Vamos a ver cómo hacemos. Bueno.
Thank you for that powerful conversation, Paola and Francia. Best wishes to you on your run. Now, tonight we have to discuss reproductive rights and justice. Shout out to some of my hometown heroes down in Atlanta, Georgia. Sister Song, who has been at the forefront of the RJ movement for decades. Now, yesterday, the US Supreme Court said it would hear a case that puts Roe v. Wade in real danger. The right wing has been salivating over this moment, but as always, we will fight for our right to choose, and we're going to win. Planned Parenthood has been organizing for reproductive rights for decades, but they have a complex history when it comes to race. The new president of Planned Parenthood confronts all of this in an op-ed in the New York Times about the organization's founder. So from the inside, this very loaded moment in time, we have Alexis McGill Johnson to tell us more about her big dreams.
We can imagine what a feminist future looks like because it exists. The question is, does it exist for all of us? For as long as I've been involved in Planned Parenthood, the question of whether or not Margaret Sanger was a racist has been essentially an open question. You know, was she or was she not a racist? And, you know, part of how we've answered that question has been to explain her away as a woman of her time, a product of her time, to kind of put a neat bow around some of her eugenicist beliefs, her ableist beliefs, in ways that I think are really detrimental to both the people who work here and the patients that Planned Parenthood serves. It's really critically important for us to think about how we build a space for those who are experiencing the most harm, and believe that when we do that, it actually will create liberation for us all. Look, I mean, the state of reproductive rights in the United States is dire. You know, we are living in what I would call a paradox. You know, we've never been more powerful as a movement. You know, we have millions of people who care about access to sexual and reproductive health care. There's literally no state in the union that believes that Roe should not be the law of the land. And yet, we have seen hundreds of restrictions just over the last 2 months in 47 states that have been designed to not only restrict access to sexual and reproductive health care, including abortion and trans care, they've also been designed in a way to take these fights all the way up to the Supreme Court. So it is quite the paradox that we could be so powerful, we could have public opinion on our side, and yet we have a set of government restrictions or government structures where the vocal minority of antis literally are controlling our access to create freedom with our own bodies. What's happening globally is so exciting. You know, it started a couple years ago when women of Ireland marched in the streets and secured access to abortion. We saw it just last year with La Marea Verde in Argentina. You know, the global fight is, to me, giving me incredible hope for, you know, our aspirations of what we should be fighting for here in the U.S. We cannot afford to be incremental when we think about change, right? That we actually have to be incredibly transformational, and we have to think boldly, because the challenges that we are facing are great. The line for leadership is short. And so when you see the young, brown, Black women, queer women driving change in the streets, it's not by accident. It's because they have been told over and over again that they weren't ready to lead, to wait for the baton, to make sure that they had everything in order before they could actually step out and get behind a megaphone. And what they have proven this year over and over again is that the leadership has always been in us, and they are the ones who will continue to show us the way.
Acid attacks is one of the most debilitating crimes in the world, where a bottle of acid worth 25 rupees can take away somebody's life and identity, and it's one of the most lethal weapons against women. As we all know, India is battling the worst crisis with COVID-19, but its effects and damages have not been reduced to just the loss of lives. We are facing a lot of socio-psychological challenges amongst the survivors we support, where there is an alarming rate of domestic violence, deaths, suicides, and a lot of other psychiatric conditions. As a feminist, it is my greatest will to make sure these women who have lost their identities are in the forefront, having equal rights and opportunities, breaking all stereotypes, and making their own decisions.
Y'all, it is about that time. We are coming to the end of our program, and I feel so blessed to have shared this moment with each and every one of you. But before we go, I'm truly honored to introduce two powerful voices. Gloria Steinem is a lot of things to a lot of people. But first and foremost, she is a prolific and prophetic writer. And poet Amanda Gorman is a renowned speaker and author of 3 books. Where does she get that time? They are here to share some powerful words to light up our future.
Hello, here I am sitting in front of a bookcase full of words, awaiting a wonderful meeting with Amanda Gorman, who is also in love with words. I've been so looking forward to being able to talk with her, and we are going to choose our favorite 5 words that we are going to try to use more in 2021. Amanda, you make me feel so good about the future.
Well, it's such an honor to meet you. I mean, you're such an icon and a leader, and definitely someone who has used their pen in such a magical and, progressive way. So you're definitely one of those people that I always look up to. So this is a huge dream come true for me.
So my first one is empathy.
Oh, I love that.
Somehow I think that's the single most important quality, because it means we can feel what other people are feeling equally, not to our exclusion, but equally.
Right. I think that's a great one, especially empathy as opposed to something like pity or sympathy, which tends to be a bit more shallow and a bit less conscious, I think. My first word was not empathy, though I think that's an amazing one. It was intersectional, mostly because I think it's such a buzzword in the feminist movement of today. And I really want to see if there's a way in which we can utilize it with the understanding of its, deep roots. Who is Kimberly Crenshaw? Why was that word written? What does it teach us about the type of imagination of social justice movement? So I want to use the word, but also use it more deeply with more kind of historical understanding.
When I checked into this women's movement, we called it intertwining. That is, race and gender were intertwined, and there was no way you could address one without also addressing the other.
I hope that there's a day in which we don't have to ask what the word means because it's kind of been distributed through culture. Even, growing up, I remember being a girl and telling people, I'm a feminist, and people even having questions about that and being unsure. And that's a word that, as a feminist myself, I'm like, how do you have questions about, the equality between women and men in this word? But I think letting words enter our rhetoric of change and letting them stay there is one of the ways in which we, press forward.
Words evolve, that's part of the fun, that they acquire meaning, are given meaning, are invented.
My second word is sustainable, mostly because I want to start thinking of solutions that can have a long time horizon and that kind of extend beyond the immediacy, and being able to work as an activist where I'm thinking of solutions that can last as well as work. And so I'm using it not only to think, as you said, about the planet and the environment, but how am I sustaining and taking care of myself?
I'm learning already, okay?
What was your second word?
Kindness. Because somehow I think that that's it's so important. The idea that you probably want to treat others as you wish to be treated. It's, to me, kind of the opposite of hierarchy, certainly the opposite of cruelty, obviously.
Kindness is one of those words that it's so beautiful to me because from a young age, it's a word that many of us know quite soon and rapidly once, we become human beings. And it's something that we all know the meaning of, even if we, don't have the Merriam-Webster definition like memorized. We all know what kindness feels like when it's felt. Well, my third word was proactive, mostly because I was thinking about movements, and I think sometimes it's compelling to be focused, I think, on kind of resistance, meaning going against something that exists, whether it be an institution or a way of thinking that is damaging. But I want to challenge myself to think past that, where I'm not just reacting to policies, but I'm thinking about how do we create new ones. I'm not just reacting to institutions. I'm thinking about how can I proactively create and imagine new ones. And so that's kind of the big dare I'm giving myself for this year.
Active is in the moment, but proactive is even before the moment.
Right, right.
My next one is person. Because I think the one thing, since we can't control what happens, but we can use what happens, I'm hoping that this year of COVID has taught us that we're all persons, we're all people, to get rid of adjectives. Now we've realized that our health depends on the health of everybody else. No one is diminished, no one is less than.
It's, so fascinating that you mentioned that because, as you famously say, we can't necessarily control everything that happens, but we can use it. And taking a moment, which, can be so dark and grievous, and using it as an opportunity to humanize everybody, as an opportunity to look at everyone as a person, which they are. And I really appreciate that. My fourth word, which I chose imagine, and I remember you saying once that dreaming is its own form of planning. I want to continue to plan by way of courageous and compassionate imagination, to really dare and challenge myself to think bigger than I ever thought possible, especially as you just mentioned, because we're entering, a new world of what it means to, have endured COVID, what there lie, the opportunities to think all the larger with all kind of a broader scope of what can be possible. My fifth one was just love. I don't think there's a more beautiful word than that. It's, one of the most important things on this earth and this planet, I would say. And I think it's a word that I have not used enough this year in the wake of COVID because, my love has been challenged by fear, by worry, anxiety, disease. And I really want to give it a reclaimed space in my own dictionary, where every day I'm reminding myself of what I love and who loves me. Love too often being a one-way street for a woman. It reminds me, that self-love also matters, particularly as a woman. And so that's something that I'm learning as well.
Well, so my last two are Spaceship Earth.
Ooh.
Because if we are Spaceship Earth, it tells us that we are all a community here on Spaceship Earth, spinning through space. To me, it brings us together in a fragile way, which is important, but in a loving, mutual way.
Well, I love that you mentioned Spaceship Earth and this idea that we're all, members of the same place and same body, which we are, and that we're all connected. And it's actually interesting that you mentioned that because I have a poem called Earthrise, which actually ends on that same note, where I imagine us as all belonging to the spaceship. The last verse of it goes, imagine we're all in the same spacecraft, floating like a silver raft, and we see the face of our planet anew. We relish the view. We witness its round green and brilliant blue, which inspires us to ask deeply, wholly, what can we do? Know that the future of this wise planet lies right in sight, right in all of us. Trust this earth uprising, all of us bringing light to exciting solutions never tried before. For it is our hope at our uncompromising core that keeps us rising up for an earth more than worth fighting for.
Beautiful. I feel completely satisfied, except I can't hug you.
Same. What I'm going to do instead is I'm giving you an air hug. Oh, so tight, I can feel it. You have strong arms.
This is a hug for everyone who hung out with us here tonight on Spaceship Earth. And as Amanda said, to see the face of our planet anew and relish the view and ask wholly, deeply, what can we do? To find some ideas about what you can do, check out the Get Involved tab on the event site. And if you missed anything or want to watch it again, you should watch it again. You can catch most of this program on demand. All right, friends, we have had a night. So to play us out in style, please welcome the Resistance Revival Chorus with Diva Mahal. And we'll leave that comment section open just a little while longer in case you have any final thoughts. Good night, everyone, and thanks for supporting us.
Hi, everyone. It's Diva Mahal here, and I am so thrilled to be joining my friends, the Resistance Revival Chorus, to perform the song that I wrote entitled Everybody Deserves to Be Free.
It isn't right for too many falling. They say it's in the name of the greater good. Oh, we lost sight. World is getting colder. What happened to the words for which we once stood? I will stand for you. Would you stand for me? Everybody deserves to be free. I would lend a hand to you. Would you lend a hand to me? Everybody deserves to be free. It's close tonight, but I leave a candle burning to light your way home. Won't give up the fight. Story isn't over, no. I won't let you walk all alone. I will stand for you. Would you stand for me? Everybody deserves to be free. I would lend a hand to you. Would you lend a hand to me? Everybody deserves to be free. Say, if you feel like I do, stand with me. If you hurt like I do, stand with me. If you feel like I do, stand with me. If you hurt like I do, stand with me. Yeah. If you think it's a shame, if it gives you the blues, oh, I'm telling you, I will stand for you. Would you stand for me?